Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thanks to Hashed and Jin, and of course the whole Hash legal team for organizing this. Yeah, it's been a long day. I know you've heard a lot of legal talk, and of course that can get a little tiring. I personally like speaking, from a place that communicates to the people that are in the space that are not lawyers, because there's a lot of things there that I think they should always sort of understand. And when I set out in my journey as to what to do for the space, I did take the approach of that consumer obsessiveness that Caroline was talking about, Commissioner Pham, because I think that's where the most impact is, and that's where the harm happens whenever you're dealing in something that's very new. So the basic problem in this space, I mean, everybody knows, everybody has heard about all of the problems that the space has had with fraud, with rug pulls, with all of these situations that have affected real people, real money. People have gotten into very serious situations. I mean, even here in Korea, obviously with Luna and Terra, that affected a lot of people. So for me, I decided, well, how can I actually help in the space through technology and also with my own background, because I am a securities lawyer. I mean, I that's my former life. I spent almost a decade working in capital markets and understanding what it meant from a legal perspective, what transparency was. And I wanted to translate that into something that was easy. The problem with this space right now is also a problem of that. I don't believe that most projects in space don't want to be transparent. I think they actually do want to be transparent. But I think the problem is that they don't know how to be transparent. They don't know what is expected of them, not only by regulators, but also by the consumers of the products themselves. So I set out first to kind of do some of my own homework as well on the consumer side. And we surveyed more than 2,000 people on the major subreddits that were focused on crypto, to start finding out what they really cared about and what they actually wanted to know about from projects, because it was a great kind of starting point. And there were some very interesting findings as well that came out of that. For example, we found out that 96% of respondents actually wanted to have either regulation come in or regulation and self-governance, combined, which is already a very interesting data point, because most people in this space that I talk to that are like the builders in this space, they don't understand that that's actually what people want. They still believe that degens rule, and that the people don't want to have that type of clarity. We also surveyed essentially whether or not they wanted a place where they could read all about a particular project. And that was another key point for me also as a securities lawyer, because one problem is that right now all of the information is spread out through a universe of channels and things where if you are actually going to buy a token in an exchange, you have a really hard time finding exactly what the project behind that token does. And we can't say that this equates to commodities 100%, because this is not coffee. These are projects that are trying to accomplish something. They have a business proposition, and you should be telling that story in full form, including the risks, right? To everyone out there that's going to be dealing in your token, whether that is in an ICO or not, it's to me irrelevant. That should actually happen for any listed token out there. You should have information that is sufficient to make a sound decision about where you put your money. So all of this, I mean, ties also very nicely with what regulators are actually looking at today. Because if you look at what all regulators are thinking about, and you've seen in every single presentation, either disclosure mentioned or user protection or consumer protection mentioned, because that's at the core of what regulators are trying to do. But the problem was, how do we do it for this space? right? And there were a couple of challenges there that were important. One, the space is in a very nascent stage where the companies or the projects, it's very rare. We haven't seen this really in almost any other segment or industry where you have like very, very small startups like issuing tokens in any, even if they're not through an ICO, it could be as reward, but then those tokens end up being traded by normal, ordinary people. And those startups can be very, very young. So how do you make a startup as well of that size be able to accomplish the goal of transparency when from a regulator's perspective, like disclosure looks like an IPO prospectus, which is 200 pages of information about what you do and who you are and what the risks entail of dealing in your security, for example, right? So anyway, next slide. So that's sort of when we came up with the idea of Mooncheck. Mooncheck set out to do a few things. One of them was to create a disclosure standard that was more specific for crypto projects. This meant that, you know, you don't look at traditional securities laws entirely for it, but you take some of those lessons from disclosure standards of securities laws and you adjust some areas to just fit the space. And that meant looking at the technology, like adjusting for decentralization and looking again at that stage of development of products. Because again, like this is different from an IPO. An IPO is a mature company that's ready to go to market. Here you have essentially a startup where, for example, you will many times not even have financial statements. You will not get the benefit of even 1 year audit sometimes when you're already dealing in a token. So certain things in the disclosure standard needed to change. And we also obviously looked at various regulations, the ones that were already in existence that we thought were highly relevant, and then also looking at the new ones that were coming out, like MiCA, to see how they were actually looking at the problem of disclosure. MiCA, in this case, you know, has the white paper requirements, and that should translate into disclosure. Another point about disclosure that I like making, and this is again more of a message to the builders and the people that are in the space, is that this disclosure it doesn't mean, I know that everybody thinks and says, well, blockchain is really transparent because you can see everything that has been done in a blockchain. Disclosure from a regulator's eye and from a consumer standpoint, it's not that, because it's also about how you deliver that information, how you present that information, and how you speak about it. You can't expect a normal consumer to go and look at all of the on-chain stuff. You can't expect them to understand it even. You can't expect them to go into every Discord where every DAO and sub-DAO that you work with is chatting about things openly, because that still doesn't provide what a regulator or what a consumer protection like lawyer would consider to be actual disclosure that protects the public, right? So then what we did is like, well, how do you actually now like remove the hurdles of providing that type of disclosure? Because it's a lot of work. As a securities lawyer myself, I know what that entails. I mean, it entails multiple conversations with the C-levels of companies and looking at every document that you have in your company to try to get that picture, and the lawyer then sits down and drafts the disclosure on your behalf with you commenting, right? So that is an extremely expensive process that, again, for the majority of the projects in the space, it's prohibitive. So we did not want that to become a hurdle to transparency. The core here was like, let's make the crypto space transparent, and let's not let those things like I have to pay for really expensive lawyers get in the way of being able to accomplish that. So, and then the last bit was creating a clear path to like regulatory compliance, at least from a disclosure standpoint, which is the part that I care about the most. And that meant also adjusting the product to be able to also, when you have the disclosure standard, identify as the new regulations come into effect, identify the areas that match with those regulations so that a project that sits in a particular jurisdiction or is like being exchanged in a particular exchange in a particular jurisdiction could then select that jurisdiction and focus on the pieces of disclosure that were important for them to tackle for those jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So what we did then was we implemented an AI solution to actually do this. Aside from breaking down what that disclosure standard should be, and we're working with several experts as well in the industry to do that, as well as listening to the consumers. So aside from that, we decided to basically use AI and gamify the process to make it very, very simple for the projects to be able to accomplish this. Now, how does this work? I was planning on doing a demo, but unfortunately, these screens don't connect because it's easier to see it in a demo. But if you're familiar with traditional disclosure, you have these big sections like risk factors, business, and we of course added sections that were more specific to crypto, like token, like governance, and then we broke down those sections into very small objectives, where essentially the AI starts playing the role of a lawyer with you, where the AI will ask certain questions off of you, and you either can chat with the AI and respond to those questions, right? Or you can upload documents. If your team has already done the work and you said, well, this document answers that question, you can upload that document and the AI processes it. If the AI decides that it needs more information in order to draft that objective of disclosure, then it will ask you, and it will ask you very specifically. It will ask you if you made a jump from A to C in your logic and how you describe something, the AI will go in and say, well, how about B? Like, what's going on there? Tell me more about that. So that way, little by little, the AI starts building a proper level of disclosure, and it's been taught to also write in a style that is typical of actual regulatory level disclosure. So with this, you basically, as a project, then you really don't have too much of an excuse of at least getting that basic level of disclosure, because little by little, as long as you continue to move through those objectives, you're going to be able to actually get there. The other thing about the AI that is also a very, very valuable thing is that it standardizes the way that disclosure is written, regardless of where you come from, because that's the other thing that I've heard from multiple founders and projects and builders is like, well, we're from a certain country, our English is not that great. Well, it doesn't matter in this. You want to throw to the AI something that's poorly written in English, it's going to fix it for you. So you don't have to go through that process of fixing the language. The same if you decide to actually even add something in a different language. It will actually process that and deliver English disclosure as well for that. So the AI is an incredibly useful tool to try to accomplish this, so that at the end of the day, when you look at your project page, like any person from the public is going to be able to go in and read your full story and click around in different areas and understand what you do wholly. Yeah, so I think, and I think there was a last point there on the and I'll talk, you don't have to go back, but the last point there is that once you've done that work, once the project has actually done that work, they've been building an amazing database of your source of truth of information. Whether you had your tech guys come in to answer like the technology questions, or your marketing people come in to answer the marketing questions, then you all of a sudden have all this beautiful information that the AI can then use for other purposes, including responding to questions from the public in other channels, because we're building bots for Discord and for Telegram that will tap into the source of truth and basically give you an answer that is aligned with your disclosure. So, but the pieces of how do we build like the full circle of Mooncheck trust, essentially, you first start with obviously the disclosure standard that is tailored to crypto, but also looking at existing regulations and tailoring to that further. Then you have like the AI-powered process that allows like the projects to actually draft that disclosure, and it also organizes the information for lawyers. The platform then will have the ability to connect the projects with lawyers for review and other services as well. and then the lawyers can come in and review that and confirm that they've reviewed it, and then you basically get also the Mooncheck stamp. Now, it's not necessary to get all the way there, because we would be happy even if they get here and they're issuing disclosure. But if you want that extra trust and extra boost trust, I mean, the AI can only do so much. You should have a lawyer also review it to make sure that everything's in order. And the lawyers through the application will have access to all the documents that have been uploaded for the drafting of that piece of the disclosure, and they'll also have all of the conversation that happened, so they can look at all of those things, tie with the disclosure, make adjustments, and sort of put their stamp of approval. This has been reviewed by us. So that's the whole idea behind it, and I think we can move to the next slide quickly. Well, just very quickly how it goes, and you can tap. So this is one of the objectives, for example. It's one of the basic objectives in disclosure. And then the AI helper starts having a conversation with you, and it asks you to describe your project's mission in simple terms, or you can upload documents. And then, you tell it whatever it is that your mission is. Then it asks some additional questions. And once you're able to respond to the questions, it finally will give you, and this was actually a real example that we did we just cut some of the questions because it's too long, but then it provides you with a pretty organized disclosure style, like draft of that particular objective, and then you move on to the next objective and the next objective, right? So, yeah, and then the access to the back of documentation is obviously permission, but then you're going to see that draft objective, and you're going to be able to access the files, and including a file with the chat that you had. And then the other thing that we're trying to do, and this is the last point I'm going to make, is that because we were really consumer-driven and oriented, we decided to just reinvent the way that the public interacts with disclosure. Right now, the public interacts with disclosure in a very old school way by looking at these, pages on places like Edgar of the SEC that are very difficult to read. What we wanted to do, especially in a very community-driven industry like crypto, was to really allow the community to interact with disclosure like it's never been done before. And that meant that you could comment. That meant that the projects could issue official responses that are also assisted by AI, so they don't have to struggle with the responses. You can follow your favorite projects so that you know what's happening with them. Contribute also like by giving comments to disclosure so that things can actually get adjusted from comments from the community, and then have like notifications as to when anything in the disclosure changes, because this is a space that moves so quickly that you can't have that traditional only yearly reporting type of disclosure that securities laws demands. We wanted to keep it super fresh, and you're going to be able to see comparisons like between different versions that have been posted on there, so that you know exactly what has changed. So that's basically like in short what Mooncheck is doing for the space. And yeah, I mean, hopefully